My background is Lisp first, then VBA, then into .NET. So hopefully I'll be able to help you guys avoid some of the challenges and pitfalls I ran into. What we're going to look at is how to create a .NET project, and Autodesk has made this quite easy now with the templates. Everybody can hear me okay, right? Yeah, good. With the templates, so we're going to look at some of the settings with the templates that they have. The handout, which I do believe is online, has all the links for where to download those templates. Then we're going to look at building a .NET AutoCAD command. Since AutoCAD Civil 3 is built on top of AutoCAD, we have to use the .NET API as well as the Civil 3D .NET API. So we're going to look at some of the AutoCAD API that we have to use, and then interact with the Civil 3D .NET API, and then hopefully we'll have time to look at the deployment methods, because once you build it, you still then have to get it out to the users and get it loaded automatically for the users. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to start by creating a .NET project. I'm using Visual Studio 2010, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a new project. And because I've downloaded those templates from Autodesk, when I fire up new project, it has in the little section there under Autodesk, I have the 2010 through 12 template as well as 2013. So it has two different ones, and I can just choose which application I want to build or a plugin. So keep in mind for 13, some of the underlying references that you need are different. So that's why you have two different plugins. So if you're doing something for 2012, you'll want to download both and get the right template. But all it's doing is going to set up a few things for us behind the scenes, and we'll take a look at what it's setting up for us. But I'm just going to choose the AutoCAD 2013 plugin, make sure I'm using the right framework, which is 4 for 13. And that should be all default for you guys once you fire this up. And name my project and click OK. When I do that, this template from Autodesk has this little wizard that walks us through it. And I specify the location of where the DLLs that it needs. Ones up there. AutoCAD, plain AutoCAD, needs 3 DLLs. DLLs and assemblies are the same thing. Okay? So whenever I use that word, I'm kind of using it interchangeably. DLL is the file that contains the assemblies. Okay? So it has 3 DLLs that it needs to work to build something for AutoCAD in .NET. AC, DB, MGD, AC, MGD, and now in 13, AC Core MGD. Where are those located? Well, you could go browse or do a search for it, but I encourage you to download, again, the ObjectARX SDK from Autodesk's website. Again, the handout has the link. Okay? When you do that, this gives you a little bit more debugging control. And when you download that, it's an installer. It says, okay, where do you want to place these files? It's just a bunch of files and documents. I placed them in this folder, and then I just, using the browse button here, browse to the INC folder. That folder is where those 3 files are. AC, DB, MGD, AC, MGD, and so on. Then I specify the AutoCAD executable location. That's the ACAD.exe that we're going to use when we debug. So when we're going to debug this program, we fire we fire it up. It starts the external application. The external application in this case is AutoCAD. Okay, well, where is the AutoCAD executable to start? So I did that, set the location, and it read that it must be Civil 3D that I'm trying to use, so there might be other assemblies. So the 3 that are grayed out are required for AutoCAD. But we're here in a class talking about the Civil 3D.NET API. 2 more are required for Civil 3D. The 2 top ones that you see that are labeled MGD, MGD is managed. It's another way of saying .NET. Nice, clean .NET. Okay? So those are the 2 that we are required to have to reference into our application. When we reference these in, then we can use these calls, this programming interface, to interact or work with Civil 3D or AutoCAD. We can write our programs. So we need those referenced into our application, and we just check those boxes. Because it's not sure if we want to do map as well, it has an additional tab and automatically checks for us what is required for map. I don't want map. Don't care about map in this case. I'm going to clear those and click OK. It builds me a new project. And over here on my Solutions Explorer, a little palette here, I have my project named AU, and it built me two classes here. And just so that we don't cheat, I'm going to delete these classes. I can shut that off. Let me go ahead into our project properties by right-clicking in Solutions Explorer. I just right-clicked and said Properties. And here are all the properties for this application. So the assembly name, assembly is interchangeable with DLL. So the assembly name is going to be the same name of the file. When we compile this, it's going to create an au.dll file for us. And it's going to contain all the programming that we're writing, that code. So we can just reference or load that in. So that's the assembly name. It's by default going to be the same name as the project. And it's good practice to kind of keep it the same. Root namespace we're going to get into a little bit more in detail as we get farther into our code. But think of namespace kind of like directories. When you are organizing a bunch of files for a project, everybody have like directory templates that they're required to use in their company? You have to follow this specific type of structure. It's so that you can organize everything properly for the projects you're working in. Namespace is simply a way to try to organize all the kinds of methods and properties and functions and routines and classes and all this stuff that we could build. And so it's going to have a namespace for the entire project, and then we could even do other namespaces kind of as we get farther in. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at or calling from Autodesk namespaces. And so we're going to see how that comes into play. A lot of times on the projects I build, for the entire project, I'm going to have a namespace that's going to be my company name. So we'll say that our company name is AU, and because this application is built specifically for Civil 3D, meaning all the tools I'm about to build in this project are for Civil 3D, I'm going to add an additional .Civil 3D. What that does is it's going to organize or kind of create an additional directory, we could say, and everything within this project now is going to be stored in my company, Civil 3D. This is useful because we could build another project, and we could reference that project. We're referencing projects from Autodesk, aren't we? 5 assemblies. We could reference one from our own that we could build. So we could build maybe an alignments assembly, a profiles assembly, and has all the functions and tools we use to interact with alignments. And then when we want to call that, we just say, well, I want to reference that project in, and now it's going to have this kind of directory structure, so to speak, that we can call from. So it's good to kind of organize it, company, whatever we're working on, and so on and so forth. That's what namespaces are. When we added these references, remember the things that were grayed out in that wizard? This is what it added for us. Those 5 DLLs, it added just perfectly in there for us and set the copy local to false for us. So it did a lot of work for us, but sometimes we have to do this manually. When we're referencing anything from Autodesk, such as the ACDB MGD, this is something that AutoCAD's already going to load. It's already going to be kind of running behind the scenes, and it's going to be built inside of AutoCAD. And we're just going to call it when we load ours inside of AutoCAD. So we don't want to copy another DLL or try to have our software call the wrong assembly. So we need to set that copy local to false. And again, the wizard does that for us. So it speeds up our process. All right, so that's kind of what it did for us. Very simple to do with the templates that Autodesk has. I didn't really do anything. I just walked you through and explained what it did. So we created our project. Let's go ahead and now create And when we created our project, we walked through a little bit about the namespaces, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail as we get farther in. And we did take a look at our references as we went along as well. So now let's go ahead and build our .NET AutoCAD command. How many have played with .NET so far? How many have built an AutoCAD command? About half the class. Okay. So this is somewhat easy to build. So let's see how easy it is. I already have my project here. I deleted all those classes, so I'm going to right-click on my project name in Solution Explorer and say I want to add a new class. A class, we're going to call this class commands. When we're coming from functional software programming like Lisp or VBA, a lot of times we think of the file. It created a file, commands.vb, for us. We think of those extra files that it builds inside our VBA project just as a store or container of our functions and so forth. In .NET, everything that we build, anytime we build a class, we're building an object. You guys heard the phrase, this is object-oriented programming, right? And sometimes we skip over that because we've done VBA in the past, and we just need to code something really quick. But if we've done Civil 3D, we know what object orientation is, right? An alignment, you move that, you're changing the profile because it's dynamically linked. The profile, of course, is dynamically linked to the surface. When you click on a label, you're not just clicking on text. It's not just an m-text string, but there's a huge object behind it. And so when we create a class, we're creating a new object. Now, we're going to use this class as a container. We're just going to store our commands in it. But we're going to see as we get farther in another option to create our own special object. Now, it's not an alignment object, but we're going to create our own little Civil 3D object in the software and use that to provide information. So just remember that with regard to classes, we're dealing with objects. And just like when you create an object, let's say you create a block in AutoCAD, you have to create the definition. That definition is stored, and you know it exists, but until you create a new instance of it, you don't see it in the drawing. You can't work with it. You can't manipulate it because you need one instance per reference. So if you're going to create a new drop inlet, you have to say insert drop inlet. So when we create a new class, we're defining the class here, but then if we want to call it, we have to create a new instance of that class, just like we're inserting a new block. Okay, so we're going to see that again as we go farther in. Let's go ahead and do our command, and it's simply an attribute, so I have that little bracket there, and we're going to say Autodesk, .AutoCAD, runtime, command, method. I expect you guys to memorize this. Change, alignment, styles. By the way, what we're going to build in this little exercise is a little application where we can select the alignments in the drawing and choose another style for them and click OK, and all the alignments that we've checked will have the styles changed. Something simple, but could be useful for us. And change alignment styles. Okay, so what we have is an attribute called command method with the command name. That's what we'll actually type at the command line. Change alignment styles. You can type in whatever you want. Especially now with IntelliSense, with 12 and 13, I encourage to include some type of abbreviation of your company name in there. You don't want to have other commands potentially be overwritten by your command. You want your name to be unique. And if you see the Civil 3D names, you see that's kind of the practice they use. Extremely long. This attribute is associated with this method called public sub, and then I just named the method change align styles. So what we're saying is when this command is called at the command line, it's going to run this routine. That's number 2, tripping on this thing. It's going to run this routine. That's a lot of typing, though, isn't it? AutoCAD. You guys ever create shortcut links on your desktop? So you're working on a project, and that's your project, and that's something you're in almost every day, multiple times throughout the day. You create a little shortcut and say 321 project on your desktop. Now, when you click on that link, it may open up Windows Explorer, and it may be Z, projects, wherever, and take you way down into a long string to get to that directory, but it's a shortcut. And you named it just, very short. This is my projects. We can do something similar in .NET using imports. So I'm going to import Autodesk to AutoCAD runtime. And now I don't have to type the entire length of that crazy name because I've imported the namespace. You see how the namespaces are coming in? This is a namespace that Autodesk has inside of AutoCAD. So it's like 3 directories down, you could say. And here is an attribute in that namespace runtime. So because I've imported it, I don't have to type the entire thing. It's available just right there. All right. What we're doing, again, with this application, we're going to run an exercise. We're going to create a little dialog box and say, change these alignments and set the styles to whatever. So I kind of have to check to see if there's any alignments in the drawing to begin with, right? If there's no alignments in the drawing, I need to tell the user, hey, look, there's nothing in the drawing to change. I'm getting out. And so if you're going to interact with the user at the command line level, you use the editor. We're still kind of in the AutoCAD world here. The editor is really just the way to get information if you're going to have them select an object, if you're going to have them, any type of prompt that you're going to build, or if you need to write information to them and tell them, hey, this is such and such, you use the editor. Well, we need to get the editor of the current document. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable, dim ed. That's my variable name. This variable is editor. All right. Autodesk AutoCAD editor, input editor. And this editor, for the current document, I'm going to set the variable to You thought the other one was long, huh? Can't even display that completely on the screen. Okay, so first off, I can get and make that an import too, right? So let's go ahead and do that. That shortens that. And you see this? I can make that an import as well. And it really makes our code a whole lot easier to read as well as to type. Does everybody see the benefit of imports and what it does? It's kind of a little bit of a shortcut to these things. And in the process, we got the current documents editor. And so that way we can interact with the user and get some information, or better yet, provide them information such as, hey, look, there's no alignments, if that's the case. Well, how do we check if there's any alignments? What we see here is Autodesk's or AutoCAD's active document, MDI active document through the document manager. We need to get the civil document to find out if there's any alignments. You guys get the idea of imports, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do some additional imports. Civil is another namespace that Autodesk has. There we go. All right. So what am I doing? I am getting the current civil document. And I'm going to set that variable to civil application active document. So now I have a variable that contains the active document for the Civil 3D world. This is a little bit different than the other active document up here. You have the AutoCAD active document. It's got all the stuff for general AutoCAD. And then you have the Civil 3D, so to speak, document. It's going to have all the stuff such as alignments. So let's get a list of the alignments.
So do you even need that first one?
I only need it to interact with the editor. I don't need it to get information about the alignment. It's only so as to provide some interaction with the user. Yeah. So notice when I go to CivDoc and click the dot, it's going to list for me all the classes that are found within it, or objects, such as the COGO points and assembly collection. It's going to have a few methods. The methods are, how do I describe methods? Methods are things that do something. You want to run an action. It's a verb. And then you have functions, such as this function right here, get align IDs. What is it going to do? It's going to do something, but in the process return to us something else. And if you pause over any of these things, it will tell you what is going, well, for a brief moment anyway, it's going to tell you what it's going to return. What is it we're going to return? In this case is an object ID collection. You see that up there? So I need my variable to be the same that it's going to return. Right? Get align IDs. What is an object ID? An object ID is, we're going to use this analogy throughout the class. You guys go to a bank and you want to find out the amount of money that you have in your bank account. And you go up to the lady and say, hey, I'm Josh. Can you tell me how much money I have? And she's going to laugh at you. She's going to say, well, I need a little bit more than your name. Give me your bank account number, right? And you provide her the bank account number, and that bank account number is not just this magic number where she goes, oh, bank account number, everything's great. She types that in, and that runs a transaction, so to speak, and gets information from the database that they use and brings it up and shows them all kinds of information about your account, your name, your date of birth, who your mom was, whatever. And it will also tell her how much money you have in there, right? So whether you want to get any information or do any information, you have to run a transaction. That's what they would do, is we would type the account number in and run a transaction. And so in AutoCAD, including the Civil3D.net API, to do anything, to get any information or change anything, we have to run a transaction. We're going to get to those in a minute. To get the information, though, to get the alignment, we have to tell it what the account number is. The account number, in this case, is what's called an object ID. Every ID, whether it's a text style or a line, or in this case an alignment, every object has an ID. It's assigned at the time the drawing is open. I repeat that. It's assigned at the time the drawing is open. Don't try to keep these object IDs stored and think that they're going to be useful the next session. When you close that drawing, that ID is gone, and it will be assigned another unique ID when the drawing is open. Okay? But that is how we interact with all these objects. And so I'm not getting the alignment objects. I'm getting the IDs for all the alignment objects. And it's providing me this list of IDs and a collection called an object ID collection. Well, if my collection is empty, that tells me there's no alignments in the drawing, right? So let's just do that. If align IDs count equals 0, then hey, I got no alignments. So I'm going to call that editor and say, write a message to the user. And I use the line feed here, so I'm always on a new line. And say, no alignments in the drawing. And then I'm going to exit this up. This is just a practice I use. I don't like huge ifs. Because if you do an if, and then you find yourself in the if, and you do another if, and you're over here, and then you're way down here. So I try to build my conditions in such a way that when I'm on the other side of the end if, that means I'm good to go. So notice here, if I'm on where my cursor is blinking, I know I've found alignments. All right? You see how that's read? Because if its count is 0, I exit the routine. All right. Let's go ahead and test this real quick. Started at 3:30. Okay, I got an hour. All right. Let's see where I was. So I'm going to hit the play button up here. Oh, lovely. And what resolution do I have then? And I'm going to go ahead and I have no clue where that was stored. I'm going to net load. And we'll just load this one because it'll be good enough to test it. So I start typing in my long, crazy name here, and thank goodness. I love this thing for coding. I went back and I have a couple programs I'm working in 2011, and I just dread having to do anything in them because of the crazy long name. So I just started typing, found it in a little list, hit that, and gave me the response. It said no alignments found, and exited the routine. That's number 3 on this little tripping thingy. So everything's good so far. All right. So that means that we've built successfully a .NET AutoCAD command so far. I have included the data set, by the way, of all of this stuff, and I've put my cards on the same table as the projector. So if you guys have any questions along the way, or if you want to play with this exact code that we're doing, feel free to do so at the end. So now that we've done enough stuff with AutoCAD, let's actually interact with Civil 3D. Now we talked about transactions. Now if we go to the bank and we tell the user, tell the teller, hey look, I want to get some information, and then she provides us that information, and then we walk away, what do we hope that she does with the information that she sees on her screen? We hope that she logs off, right? We don't want our information up there for forever. And so chances are what we're going to do is we're going to ask her to print something out or to write something down so that we can carry whatever information we needed back to wherever. It's kind of similar when we're working with these objects. In a transaction, we're getting information. We want to find all the alignments. We want to find the names of these alignments in the drawing. Well, we need to go ahead and interact with the database of Civil 3D, the drawing, the document here. And we need to get the alignments, get the information and the names. But Civil 3D is inherently and designed to be a very dynamic software, right? So chances are we may not be the only ones trying to interact with the database. So we fire up a transaction, we say, well, I'm going to leave this transaction open for the entire time I'm working with this custom routine. That can create some issues because other parts of the program may want to be trying to do transactions, and especially if we lock it down or they lock it down, all of a sudden we crash. And if you guys have ever played with .NET, crashing with .NET is real crashing. It takes down the whole application because it's really powerful stuff that we're doing. So the key is to be in our transaction as short as possible. Great. But as soon as I close the transaction, I've logged off, so to speak. I can't see anything about the alignment. So how in the world do I get the information and use the information outside of the transaction? Because once you close that transaction, anything that you work with is just done. Well, what did you do at the bank? You wrote down the information or asked her to print something out, and then you had a copy. Same stuff, but you had a copy. We're going to create our own little objects. We're going to create a class, and we're going to use this class to store information for us. And then we can use that information completely outside of the transaction. It's just name, it's object ID, nothing crucial. And then we have all this information outside the transaction. We don't have to worry about anything else. So how do we create our own little special object? Well, close this guy down. Sure. Oh. All right. Discard. Public class. That begins a whole nother discussion. between public, friend, private, all that stuff. We're going to look at, when we build the class, we'll take a look at that. So I'm going to go to the Solution Explorer. I have my commands class here. I'm going to go right-click. I'm going to add another class. And we're going to name this class Base Civil 3D Object. So it's created a new class for us. Tell me, this is a generic Civil 3D object that we're going to use kind of as a collector of information. So we can use this for styles, we can use this for alignments, we can use this for surfaces. Tell me, what one thing do all Civil 3D objects have in common? I'm sorry? An object ID, okay. So we need an ID. Anything else? Name. Always has a name. They do usually have a style. Feature lines are they're a little rebel on that one. But yes, a name, ID, potentially style. So these are different things that you can kind of store in your generic one here. So I'm going to create a private variable, if I can spell. And assign a starting variable, starting info to it. And then I'm going to create a public property called name as string. Return, and I'll explain this in a minute. Okay, so what I've done is I'm defining a block. You guys have done this in AutoCAD, right? Everybody's done a block? You create a line in the block, and that has special information because you put it on layer 0, and then said that it's properties by block or something. So you can kind of manipulate that line after the fact for every instance, every time you insert that block, right? It's kind of like this. We're creating a property here, like color, so to speak, for that block. And we're saying, I want this property to be available to be adjusted for every single time I create a new instance of this generic object. The property is name. And how do I store this property in this class? I created a little private variable that nobody can see. And it stores the information for me. So when you ask me for the name, I'm going to call and say, well, what is this variable, oname? And I'm going to return whatever that variable is. If you want to change the name, I'm going to set that little variable oname to something, to whatever you tell me to set it to. So very powerful, and we can go ahead and add all these other properties such as the object ID and a few others. One of the ones we're going to add is what's called isSelected. Can't spell. And very easy to do all of these things, just a lot of properties. You can include, subroutines, functions, different things like that in your class. So we're looking. So we're looking at the commands class that we first built. Kind of works like a container. When we were in VBA, we created a module. Created a module, and we stored our different subs in there. That was a container, pretty much is how we used it. Now we're using or creating a class, and we're using it not as a container, but more as an object that we can create new instances of and assign different properties and then store these and use it. Kind of like creating new alignments in our drawing. So now that we have this, we have our special class. How do we get the information from the Civil 3D? So here you have a completed one. How do we get the information from Civil 3D? I'm going to create another class. And by no means do you have to go through all of this. We could have done all of this in the command. But this is one of those best practices we want to think of. Chances are we want to get alignment objects in other commands down the road. We're building our first command, yes. But later down the road, do we want to get alignment objects as well? Probably. Do we want to rewrite this code every single time? Absolutely not. And so if I kind of store this in other places and then just call it when I need it. It speeds up the process. And then when I find an error in the code, which you will, when I change that one location, all of them work now. So that's just a means to kind of break it up. You guys use Civil 3D. You know about breaking stuff up, right? Using data references, you store things in different files and spread it out. It's kind of what we're doing here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create another class. Say add class, and we'll call this functions. This one's going to work kind of like a container as well for us. In fact, this is a special container because of the way I'm going to write these functions. Remember, a function does something but then returns something to us. So when I write the function get alignment objects, and we're going to include an argument. Okay, so what are tool tips? Just love them or hate them. What I've written, a function that when we call it, we must tell it, do I want to include the referenced alignments in the list or not? So true or false. So when I'm looking for a full list of alignment objects, it says, do you want to include the referenced alignments or do you want to kind of cut them out of the list? And it will return to me at the end a list or collection of those base Civil 3D objects that we just created, storing the name, the ID, whatever else from the alignments that are actually in the drawing. Okay? I created as a shared function. Shared is kind of special in the sense that, you know, we kept referring to these things that, and this is an object, so I'm going to have to create a new instance of functions, and then I'm going to have to call this. Well, I'm just using it as a container. So instead of creating a new block every single time, I can just say, call this. I don't have to create a new instance of functions every time. Hope that made sense. That one might be over. But play with shared. That's a great little feature depending on how you're using the classes. All right. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get a list. So we're going to kind of walk through what we just did. Dim, civ, doc. Oh, imports. Imports, my savior. Civil document equals civil application active document. Dim align IDs. Pretty much exactly what I've written already. Get the active civil document, get the alignment ID collection, and if there are no alignments, I'm going to return nothing. There's going to be no list to return. So if I'm at where the cursor is, that means I know there's alignments. I can go ahead and create a transaction. And to create a transaction, I'm going to take advantage of what's called a using statement. Remember, we talked about getting in and out of that transaction and avoiding making too much mess in there. You can leave the transaction open as long as you want. Just, I've seen too many times something's gone wrong because I left the transaction open. Because I'm calling another function inside the transaction and I'm trying to lock something. It's just, for me, best practice has always been get in and out. Do what I need to do and get out. So I use this statement here, and this statement creates a variable called trans. The variable then is assigned to the current documents database. The transaction manager, which stores transactions, because you could have multiple transactions going on at the same time. And we start a new one. Once it gets to the end, where you have the other little red mark there, that transaction is disposed, cleaned, done, gotten rid of. And so the only time I have to worry about the transaction running is in between the using statement. Very nice, clean way of handling that and disposing of it properly. And to make sure I get out of it nice and clean and don't leave a transaction running accidentally, I always add a try, catch, in try inside my transaction. So that's what we have so far, just to be safe. All right. So dim align as alignment. Ooh, need another import. When I teach classes, a lot of people say the biggest challenge is just learning where everything is. If that's the case for you, Object Browser can be a very nice friend. Object Browser lists all the objects that are found that are currently referenced by your project, and you can just type in what you think you're looking for, and it'll give a list. So dim align as alignment, and then I'm going to go and loop through I'm going to loop through that alignment ID collection. It's a group of alignment of object IDs. Since there's a group of object IDs, I say for every object ID that you have in that collection, assign the variable, start the loop, and do this within the loop. And so now I can get the actual alignment object. ID. And we're just looking to get information. We're not changing it at this moment. And notice, because now I have the alignment object, when I hit that little dot, it provides me a huge list of all the properties. That's the little finger. Remember properties? We created properties for our own object. Same thing that you have there. Alignment object has properties that you can get and or set. So there's the properties with the little finger. Then there's functions and a few other things. One of the properties we want to get is a Boolean to find out if it's a deref object or not. So what do I have so far? I've gotten to the transaction and said, get me the object. Here's my bank account number, the object ID. Well, how do you want to get the object? Do you just want to get information about it? Yeah, just in a read mode. All right, well, here's your object. And, you know, remember we had that argument when we created this function called include derefs? Up there, include derefs. So I'm using that argument and saying, okay, if you tell me not to include derefs, I need to check to see if it's a referenced object or not. And so I check, is it a referenced object? If it is a referenced object and I don't want to include them, I continue the loop. Start the loop over again. Continue for. And it starts at the top and goes down to the next ID in the list. Okay? So at this point where the cursor is blinking, I know I'm good. And I continue on. So I'm going to... I've got a few other variables, such as list. I'm running out of time real quick on it. So now I'm inserting or creating a new instance of this object that we created, this class, base Civil 3D object. So I can create a new one, assign it to this variable, and now I can assign the properties that we made. Name, ID, and so on. Say the ID is whatever the alignment ID is. The DC object name is whatever the alignment name is, and so on and so forth. And then I can add it to the align list. That's the object. And so it will go through and loop through every single alignment in the alignment object ID collection. We're going to take the information while we're in the transaction, store it in our own little special object, the ID and name, and then that will be available to us outside the transaction. And so now I just return base alignment to list, and the user gets this nice pretty list of objects having the ID and the name and whatever else we have stored. Okay? So now, all we have to do is call these within our command. So if you notice, we're back at the beginning within our command. Back to where we started. So now I need to figure out and get that list of alignments. And so I'm just going to create dim aligns as list base Civil 3D object equals functions. Remember we created the class and it was named functions. And inside functions I have two functions. Should have used a different name for the class, I suppose. Could be easily confused. Get alignments and get alignment styles. Get alignment styles, by the way, is just about exactly the same the way we wrote get alignments. Great example in the data set, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on there. But same scenario. So get alignments. And note, you remember, with this one, we had to include an argument. Tell it whether I want derefs or not. I'm just changing the style. All right? So I don't care if it's a referenced alignment or not. Give me that list. So now I have this. Now, if this list is empty, then get out. Yes, I know. It's the exact same thing we just wrote up above. So I could take that completely out, right? And I don't need that. Same thing for the align styles. So it's a generic list. It's a generic object that we have, this base Civil 3D object. I can use it for a lot of different things. Now, granted, the more you start using these things, you might want to create your own special, I don't know, AU alignment object, an AU alignment style object, and store a whole lot more information than just the name and the description or whatever. But it's a great way to start. Get alignment styles. There's no such thing as referenced alignments styles, so if there's no alignment styles, you got issues. You really better get out. So that's what I have built in. If there's no alignment styles, I'm out of here. Okay? Now that I have this, I got to show the user or display to the user all of this information. Again, coming from VBA. How many are coming from VBA? I keep using that reference. Only a third. So what is everyone else using? Anything at all? Everyone's coming from C#. Well, there's not that much difference. Just the fun formatting. You don't use semicolons everywhere. Do what? If you say so. That's like parentheses in Lisp. Either way, a lot of times we're so used to using forms. But with .NET, they included a new means called windows. So you remember when I chose to add here, I could choose to add a window. A window is very similar to a form, dialog box. But it gives you a whole lot more power because it uses what's called WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. And if you notice down here, way too many windows open going on here. The entire form is written really using XML. Format, so to speak, of XML. But the power with WPF is not the pretty XML and easy to read XML once you get used to it. The power is that you can pretty much directly connect to those objects. You remember we created a list of objects? One of those properties was is selected. I can map, in fact I have it right here. So I click on this little list box. It's going to list all the alignments. And notice I've mapped the checkbox and said if the checkbox is checked, it's going to change the property of the object. What property is it going to change? Is it selected or not? So it's directly mapped to objects. That way when we click on a box, we're not clicking on a little checkbox that we have to then go through our code and see has this been checked or not. It's already been checked. It's been changed. You've gone to the object itself and changed the object. So WPF allows you to really accomplish a lot better mapping between the object that we're working with and the means to view that object. This class isn't on WPF, but I encourage you to take a look at the sample, at number 4. That walks you through it. But what I've done is I've told it that anytime you create a new instance of this window, this dialog box, you have to feed me 2 arguments. You have to feed me the list of alignments, and you have to feed me the list of alignment styles. That way this window cannot be called without those in there already. And so as soon as you call that window and create a new instance of it, you give me this little list, and then I tell it where the list is supposed to go. Okay? So that's what we're going to do here. Dem win as new, win alignment styles. And it says, all right, you're creating a new instance of this, kind of like inserting. Just think of new instance as like inserting a new block. You're inserting a new block here. You have to give me 2 things. All right? I can give you aligns, and I can give you align styles. And now I'm just going to show this dialog box. Oops, okay. Yeah, okay. Now let's do this right. Autodesk, built inside of AutoCAD, has a means to kind of make our windows or dialog boxes, the forms, either one that you choose, to show and recognize that they're connected to AutoCAD. You ever gone and done Alt-Tab and you have a dialog box open and you do Alt-Tab and it's like the dialog box disappears but you can't do anything else? That's because they didn't do this. So we're going to Autodesk, AutoCAD, Application Services, that's all in the import, that's why you can't see it. Application.show modal window. It's a better way to show these dialog boxes that we build. And then we're going to say when as the variable, and it's going to return to us if the user clicked OK or not. Okay, so dim return as Boolean. So it's going to return a Boolean, and the Boolean will be connected to if the user clicked OK or cancel. If they clicked OK, it's a true. If they click cancel, it's a false. And if they click cancel, I want to get out, right? Okay? So we didn't spend a lot of time building the form, but it's interconnected with all those lists that we have. The lists are simply created from functions we've built, and those functions we can use beyond just this command. Okay? All right. We looked at transactions and everything else. What do we have? Let's go ahead and build this. This is number 4. Yes, 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 yes. We open up a drawing here that has alignments. going to net load someday. Then debug, get that DLL. What was the name change? Something. And there's our list. So it gets all the styles that are in the drawing and provides a list of all the alignments in the drawing. Now you saw how we got the alignments, and the styles is exactly the same way. We did a transaction. We iterated through or looped through that transaction saying, okay, this is alignment IDs. And here's the ID. Give me information about that alignment. Okay, I'm going to make a copy of that or a receipt of that alignment. Name, the receipt of the ID, and I'm going to store that in a list. And then I just show that list in this dialog box. Okay? So now the fun, though, all that we've done so far, and if you guys have done any coding at all, you know that 90% of what you write is just to make sure that the user doesn't do something stupid. To track the user. The amount of code that we're about to write now is all just about 6 lines, and it does all the changing, does all the work. Everything up till now is just interacting with the user. And you can use dialog boxes, selections, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and yeah, so this is working. So. When you're about to change something, and we can get into a whole discussion about application context versus document context versus section, all this stuff. But whenever I'm about to change something in the database, I lock the drawing that I'm currently in. Okay? How do I do this? Well, it's the same way with a transaction, because if you lock that database, you're saying nobody else can touch it. Nobody else can do anything. I got control over it. Okay? So we're locking that document down, and I want to make sure that when I'm done, it's unlocked. So I do 2 different ways to make sure that happens. First, I wrap that in a using statement. So when I get to the end using, the lock is done, disposed of, and the drawing is unlocked. And then I wrap that in a try, catch, end try to make sure that if something happens and I have errors, I still unlock and I walk away. Now we create a transaction. And what are we doing? Right. We're walking through and going to change those alignments. Oh, let's do a try catch. So for each ID as object ID in when aligns. Oh wait, for each. The window, that form that we have here, has a special little variable called aligns, and I simply said when you feed me that list of alignments, I'm going to assign it. You see where it says aligns equals alignments? I'm going to assign the friend aligns to that same list. That way, when you make that checkbox, you're changing that property. I can track it in that list of aligns. And so when I'm in my command here, I'm going to iterate through every one of those alignment objects and check to see if it's been, looking to see if it's been checked or not. So if BCO is selected equals false, then continue forward. So if it's not checked, go to the next one. So if I'm at where the cursor is blinking, I know I've been checked. I know this is an alignment that you want to change. Okay? If that's the case, then I need to create another variable. The great thing is I now take my receipt back to the bank and saying, okay, I obviously don't have enough money in my bank account. I need to make a deposit. I want to change something now. So I have this generic object I've created, and it stored the ID when we went through the first time. So now I know what the object ID is for the alignment that I want to change because it's been checked. So I get that ID and say, give me the alignment. And this time, I'm going to change something. So I've opened it for right. What am I changing? I'm changing the alignment style ID. Style ID means it's the style object ID. Even the styles have a little bank account as well. Well, where do I get that? I go back to my window. Or that dialog box. We have a little combo box over here in this window. That's the list of all the styles. So I've named that combo box you see there, it's called combo style. I've named that combo box that. So whatever object is selected in that combo box, that's the style you want to set all those to, right? Well, I don't check for the name though. I say this item that's in the combo box, because I'm using WPF, this item is a real object. It's directly mapped to the style, generic style object that we created. The generic style object also has an ID when we did the whole walking through and iterating through. So now I just say, okay, give me the ID. Oops. Where was that? So I say, okay, the alignment style ID is whatever the combo box's selected item ID is. Done. I iterate through, and everything's changed. Not much code at all here, except if we don't commit our changes, then everything we just did was for naught. So we're opening up the database. We're looking at the alignments. We're saying we want to change something. We change it, but if we don't commit those changes back to the database, and I do forget this probably once a day, then you haven't changed anything. All right? So we're doing a lot of regular AutoCAD connections, very similar. If you've done any AutoCAD programming, you're going to see a lot of that kind of coming or creeping into the .NET API for Civil 3D because they want to create some consistency. And that's how we're working with the alignment object. So let's see how this works. Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead and open up a drawing that has some alignments. I don't even remember what I was in. Still in 4. Net load, change alignment styles. All right, so existing, I guess. Maybe offsets, basic. We'll do basic. And we'll check 2 alignments, and we'll click OK. So change those 2 alignments to the basic style. So everything seemed to work. What do you know? First click, I like that. All right, so we got the good portion of our application built. And we're going to get to the deployment, and then if you guys have any questions or you want to look back at the styles, we can do that. I just want to get to the deployment process as well. Deployment used to be where you had to go into the registry and track down which version of the registry and then figure out which language and all this other stuff. Autodesk came up with a nice little means to accomplish this a little bit more effectively when the App Exchange came out. They're using now a little XML file. Where are you? Go away. Called package contents. I use XML Notebook a lot of times to read XML. I don't know if you guys have ever used that. But it makes XML a whole lot easier to read, I think. You can download it. It's good to just Google XML Notepad. But this is just an XML file. You kind of give some information, who you are, what the application is, and then can it run on 32-bit and 64-bit or just 64-bit? Is it built for at least AutoCAD 13? Which one are we on? Yeah, 13. Sorry, I was just in ADN classes yesterday talking about the next version, and I'm seeing this number in my head. So R 19.0 is Civil 3D 18. So that's the minimum that we built this for, right? What platform? Got to have Civil 3D. And then it walks through all of these things. This is a finicky XML file, by the way. Very powerful, but very finicky. So how do you know what is required? What do you need to enter? If you go to the Autodesk Help online for developers, and you can do a search for this, by the way. Well, that didn't save that location at all. You kind of stink. So now I'm going to have to do a search. They have this little page here that walks through some of the information, even shows you a sample package contents.xml. The data set that's online also has a package contents XML, walks you through all of these things, and then at the very bottom is what's called the format reference. Format reference tells you what elements are required, what elements are optional, and so on. Okay, well, what is required in the elements? You come down to the bottom of that, and it walks you through the elements and some of the settings in there. Better yet, take advantage of the sample one that's in the help and just copy it and kind of tweak it to yours, or take it from the data set I just threw up there on the AU site and edit. Because it is finicky, but very powerful, because once you have that XML built, all you have to do is find some way to copy a folder that is named, your project name .bundle. Has to have .bundle. That was also another thing that drove me crazy. Copy that folder, and what does that folder have? All it has is that XML file and that completed DLL that we made. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to come over to C Program Files, Autodesk, and notice there's a folder called Application Plugins. And I'm just going to paste that .bundle in there, so to speak. Okay? So now when I fire AutoCAD Civil 3D, yes, okay. It will pop up and tell me that my application has been successfully loaded. All right? Prove it. Let's type in our command name. It's in there. So we don't have to get into the registry at all. We don't have to try to read any of that stuff. And if I fired AutoCAD and opened AutoCAD, my program would not load because I said it's Civil 3D specific. That's all built into that XML file. Yes?
Is there a way to push that out with GPO or some other method? Because when I write a command, I need to get it out to 250 users quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sit in front of
Do you have any type of robocopy or anything when they log in? It's just copy it down then. That's
So there's no elegant method.
no networking process at the moment. At the moment. Sorry? I haven't seen that work because you're trying to load a DLL from the network. You get into a whole security scenario, and your app, then you need to make some changes for each computer so that they'll allow, the Windows will allow a DLL or assembly to be loaded from the network. If you have that working, I have not tried the package contents from that.
Like if you're going to do the network code, they can't configure whatever it is file and then have one line.
Yeah. It's more than that because you have to run something in DOS. I don't remember what it was, but some
.NET security.
protocol you have to shut down. Pretty much shut down this specific type of net security for every user. I can get it to you, David.
I think it's called the
It's in the manifest.
AutoCAD config or something like that. It's like a big file. You go in there, it's XML. That's it. And then you just change that one line, and then
For the security there.
you want it inside your object inside that support search path. You don't want to use it. You have to write a list of call.
Good enough. Kind of. You're kind of changing the security for that one application, and AutoCAD just added that, I think, in the last 2 years.
Yeah, because the power that you're showing right here is that you just dump this in there and automatically picks it up with command.
Yep. 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 And with companies that have like 200 users and you have all those computers, which most companies have more than 10, and that's where things get ugly because it has to be kept local unless you get fancy and do the networking thing. But what I usually find is you're going to have some type of copying process going on probably when they log in anyway, and just build that in, quick batch to build that in, do it every day, just don't change it. And then when you need to change that DLL, just place it in the network folder, and that copies the new one down when they log in the next day. All right, so let's make sure. By the way, this is pretty much all I use this for. Don't try to PowerPoint you guys to do that, but I do try to make sure I stay on outlines here. When we worked with the Civil 3D.NET API, we looked at transactions. Everybody have a kind of a somewhat a grasp where you feel confident enough to try transactions now? What's going on? You're simply going to the database and you're saying, I want to do something. Whether it's just getting information or changing information. We learned that classes are not just containers. We can make our own little objects. And we can go a whole lot beyond just creating our own little objects. We can make children objects, so to speak, that inherit this and so on and so forth. But think of classes as a means to kind of create our own little blocks with our codes. Whether we're just storing information or we're going beyond that and using them to accomplish functions and so on. I'll give you an example. I'm working on a project now where it's a huge hydrological analysis program. Yes, I know there's SSA, but they wanted something special, specific, and so they have their own little pipe, their own little structure, their own little network object that I've built that has all kinds of routines that store frequencies and durations and intensities and links and all these other things that you don't have with the regular Civil 3D stuff, but that we have in the application. So it goes well beyond, you can build these objects however you want. That's a class. Functions, we looked at creating our own functions, and then that user interface we just scratched the surface with. So we looked at deploying that code. The key right there, and you can place, we placed it in the program files application plugins. Each user currently has an application plugins folder as well. But I strongly, strongly encourage you to use the program files application plugins. Autodesk is easy, is known to change things. So I strongly encourage you to use this one. That's all I can say. All right. So that pretty much ends the class. That opens up time for introductions, or questions, I should say. But I encourage you guys, please fill out your forms. There's no forms anymore, is there? Copy that from the last one. Everything's electronic now. Fill out your requests, your surveys. That really helps guide classes for the next year and helps me know how I can improve as well. Hopefully, it gives you guys enough interest to dig into Civil3D.net API. If you have any questions along the way, especially with the data set, like I said, I have my card sitting on the projector. Any questions?